Session 38. Good evening, comrades in arms, so to speak. I see that we are quite alone. The session should be quiet. I am pleased with your letter. I see that you have it out on the deck for me, as if it was an apple for the teacher. I'll take some bite of it. I do not intend to let Ruber in on any of my plans or intentions, as far as demonstrations are concerned. It is much better all around if he be kept clear of such knowledge. The last session with your friend went off extremely well, and I hope that he follows my advice. If Ruber had known what was in my mind, he would have been nervous and self-conscious. Therefore, I cannot tell you in advance of any such demonstrations, and in the case of my advice to Philip, the slight demonstration of what you would call, I suppose, clairvoyant knowledge had two purposes. The advice itself was important. Philip's abilities along the lines of electronics have not been developed to near capacity, and it was for his own good that I mentioned them. Then also, the demonstration boosted Ruber's confidence in these sessions. That is all I will say about the matter for now. It is entirely within my abilities to produce such a plan as your psychic society is reaching for. At this point, it would be difficult for Ruber to know of the possibility of such a demonstration before any particular session. I am not ruling out for now any foreknowledge on Ruber's part. Rob, just what do you mean when you speak of demonstrations? Or don't you want to say? They said, I mean any such performance as suggested in your letter for the Psychic Society. What I do, I will do. I am saying that I do not want Ruber's consciousness involved beforehand, and the nervous strain on Ruber's part of wondering how such events will come to pass must also be avoided. Otherwise, everything is coming along well. The material will make its own friends, and I suppose, its own enemies. You will, as I have said before, benefit through the quiet exercise of your inner senses. This cannot be stressed too strongly. Such use of the inner senses will also be of benefit to both of you in these sessions, and will add dimension to them in a manner with which you are as yet unfamiliar. You, Joseph, are definitely improved as far as your relationships are concerned. Now, I can tell you that you safely navigated through what could have been a most difficult winter season. Not only did you come through without the possible bruises, but you have gained in stature, understanding, and ability. I hope that this will make up for all the yelling I did earlier. Nevertheless, I believe that you have benefited from my rather stern and sometimes heavy-handed lectures. Ralph said, yes. They said, now, about the inner senses. They fit together in a much more organized fashion than the outer senses do, and in some cases, they tend to overlap. To describe them separately is difficult at best. Their functions are so intertwined, and the distinctions between them are oftentimes extremely subtle. Too subtle a few cases to be appreciated by you. Operating more or less normally, they work as a whole. You will experience them separately. In many cases, simply because of your own ineptitude. This should not be too hard to understand, since your own outer senses are often blacked so that you are not aware of any given stimulus at any given time. That is, you may hear sounds and consciously ignore them. Rao said, I have had sensations several times lately. Say said, you are doing better than Ruber, as far as your outside homework is concerned. Work with the ESP cards will be beneficial to both of you, since as you progress you will, through certain subconscious clues, become aware of varying circumstances that will enable you to feel when you are coming through. Ra said, Jen said something about that today. They said, this is legitimate, but without the strange mixture of discipline and freedom already achieved in these sessions. Such awareness would not be possible at all, and certainly this is something you will have to work at. It is not instantaneous by any means. Rao said, we wondered about that. We also rather thought 2 participants were necessary to get good results with the cards. They said, for purposes of sending records to Duke, you may be best covered by using 2, an operator and a subject. But for your own or our own purposes, 1 is sufficient. I do suggest, however, that you both also work with the cards. I want to go into the inner senses further, but suggest that you take your first break. I may make this a short session, since Ruber is somewhat indisposed, and after all, I am not that much of a tact master. But if I do make it a brief session, then I will have you exercise your abilities with the ESP cards until the ordinary ending of the session, so you will not get off scot-free. As far as the inner senses are concerned, they merge smoothly, 1 into the other, operating as a unit in what I will call pure unhampered circumstances. They work that way for me, for example, yet I must attempt to list them separately for you. There are difficulties also, not so much in interpretation as the fact that some terms may be negatively suggestive, or that you may put emotional connotations where they do not belong. For example, as I have said, the fourth or conceptual sense ignores what you call past, present, and future, and so can appreciate a concept in its entirety, can actually express the concept in much the same manner that you might work out an idea through a drama, if you follow me. Only in this case, the dramatization provides its own actors. I am going to leave further discussion of this sense until some later station, when after additional material, you will be able to understand it more thoroughly. And again, remember that these senses, these inner senses, operate as a whole, and that at least to some degree, the divisions between them are somewhat arbitrary on my part, and are made for the sake of simplicity. The 5th inner sense carries us further along in this direction, and involves what I will call cognition of the knowledgeable essence. This sense differs from the 4th inner sense in that it does not involve the cognition of a concept. It is similar to the 4th sense in that it is free, of course, from the arbitrary past, present, and future, and it is also similar in that it involves an intimate becoming, or a transformation of self into something else. In this case, it would involve living tissue. The analogy is difficult, on your terms. With your outer senses now, you attempt to understand a relative or a friend. Use of this fifth inner sense, were it available to you, and in its fuller sense, fortunately it is not, will enable you to enter into your friend. Now, this certainly sounds not only unbelievable from your point of view, but probably undesirable, and if so, I appreciate and understand your reactions. However, I certainly cannot let possible, unfavorable reactions on your part govern what material I give you. This inner sense is not only an important one, but is immensely beneficial, and is not misused in any way by those able to use it. Very simply, these senses do not function until they can be handled correctly. This sense in no way involves invention. It does not imply that one entity can control another. It merely involves direct, instantaneous cognition of the essence of living tissue. I use the word tissue with some caution. Nevertheless, all entities, except for a few important exceptions, are in one way or another enclosed within themselves, and also connected to others by some sort of capsule, and your word tissue would seem to be the closest I can come to this. This fifth sense, then, would enable you some freedom to cross this living tissue boundary into other living territory. Do not think of this living tissue necessarily as flesh, since those who are capable of using this sense fully are not on your plane to begin with. Now, this sense, like all other inner senses, is being used by the inner self-conscious ego, but the outer ego is not permitted awareness along these lines. A minimal amount of information from these inner senses is given to the outer ego after it is sieved through the subconscious, but only a minimal amount. Without any use of this fifth inner sense, no man will even come close to understanding another. This is an extremely important point, and perhaps your phrase, to put yourself in someone else's place, most clearly approximates this sense. Direct experience in these inner senses will give you a much clearer picture of them than any words, even mine, can do. You understand, however, that any direct experience will be of very low power. I don't want to blast you off your feet. Again, I suggest a brief break. Molecular construction is formed from the inside and is not rigid. On your plane, such construction and such electronic and atomic patterns, frameworks, and fields are rigid to a degree, but even on your plane, there is constant and apparent change. The pattern on your plane is more or less rigid while you exist on your plane. Nevertheless, the atoms and molecules within that pattern are far from rigid, though the pattern remains more or less the same. It is your habit, or the habit of your scientists, to carry apparent universal laws over into areas in which they do not apply. In actuality, molecular structures and patterns are not rigid. They merely appear so from your viewpoint, nor are they imposed from without. Vitality gives itself a shape and form. The form does not impose itself upon the vitality. Therefore, it is not strange to consider the possibility of changing from a will. And this is exactly what happens basically in the universe. to some extent, and to a much larger extent than you realize. This happens on your own plane. Only in this case, it is the subconscious will that does the actual transforming. Rough act, like the time Jane and I created those images at York Beach? They said, in a much more simple manner, however, you make your own camouflage universe, as I have told you. The growth of a disability, say, the appearance of an author, is the introduction of another camouflage reality to the physical body. Something that was not there suddenly is there, and in your physical universe. And while this may be a poor analogy, the author represents a creation of something new to the physical structure. It is formed by the unconscious will for reasons of its own. It is a variation on the original pattern. I intend to tie this in for you later with a clearer explanation as to how you on your plane form your own camouflage universe, and to elucidate on the fact that form is not rigid, though it appears to be in many cases on your own plane. I want to show you how form can be changed, even on your own plane, and give you clear examples here so that you will see how in the inner reality universe, vitality can and does change its form at will. This may sound difficult, but I hope that it will be plain when I am done. I am mentioning this material in the sensation with the fifth inner sense, so that you will finally understand that use of the fifth inner sense is not actually as strange as you may have thought it to be. Now, I suggest a break. Believe it or not, I actually look forward to your spring and summer, and while traffic may bother you in the summer, I will find the air from the open windows most enjoyable. Now, again, understand that I am breaking down an extremely complex concept into piecemeal data. There are again extremely subtle differences at times between these inner senses. Although at either end of the scale there is great distinction. To complete our skeleton outline, and we will go much more deeply into all of the inner senses, I will give you some data on the sixth inner sense, which actually involves a knowledge or ability used by some of the others. As far as inner senses go, it is an extremely basic and rudimentary sense, containing within it the possibility of other inner senses. Although it is one of the most necessary senses, I could not give it to you first, since you would not have understood it. This sixth inner sense is concerned with the entity's innate working knowledge of the basic vitality of the universe, without which no manipulation of vitality stuff would be possible. As, for example, you could not stand up straight in your physical universe without first having, among other things, an innate sense of balance. This sixth sense is too important to skim over, and yet I wanted to mention it this evening because it fits in with our discussion. Without this sixth sense, and without its constant use by the inner self-conscious ego, you could not even construct the physical camouflage universe of your own plane. This sense, again, is used constantly beneath the outer ego's awareness, and forms the basis for camouflage constructions on every plane. The material I am giving you here is very fragmentary. However, I want the outline to go along, and I will always continue to fill in This sect innocence is so important that this material should be read thoroughly, as I will end up as one of the basic parts of our material, from which many other important discussions will follow. And when I go more thoroughly into the actual manner in which man constructs his universe, this material will be a basic starting point. I do not intend to leave material in a general, undifferentiated fashion, but will add details. But first you need the skeleton outline. A little unconnected comment here, concerning your good doctor's suggestion that you asked me about the stock market. Frank Watts made a few stops in that direction, and almost got severely wounded. In any case, I am sure you know my answer. Financial gain is perfectly all right. However, this material is not to be used for that kind of financial gain. If we did that kind of thing once, and if Ruber let it come through undistorted, theoretically our material would consist of stock reports. Everyone would want to know how to beat the market, and the material would quickly disintegrate. The knowledge is what I am trying to get across to you, and anyone who is ready and able to receive it. Too bad for the poor doctor. Ralph said, "Oh, I don't think he's so poor." They said, "I must agree." They said, "And now I am going to give you an unheard of bonus, and close the session a trifle earlier, since Ruber has been indisposed, and yet did not refuse to hold the session. Also because I got through the material I wanted to give you already. However, you know me, and I will make up the small difference in time. The material itself this evening was rather complex, and Ruber did allow it to come through, for which I shall give him the proverbial gold star. I enjoyed the session myself very much, and am pleased that we could get this material through now. I had thought earlier that you would not be ready for it until a later time. I do hate, as always, to leave you." Ralph said, "What are you going to do now?" They said, "Since I am leaving you a bit earlier, perhaps I will drop around for a short time before our next session. Again, I am pleased with your added ability to understand your parents, Joseph. You are the apples of my eye, you too. And now, fond friends, I bid you good evening."